welcome to the Pathbreakers, the podcast that celebrates leadership and amplifying social change. I am Rodem Musawa, your host for today, and on this episode, we dive into the crucial fight for peace in a world riddled with conflict. And today, we are graced by an amazing guest. So joining us today is Sean William Connor, the Executive Director of International Peace Bureau, one of the oldest peace organizations in the world, and at the same time, a Nobel Peace Prize awardee. For over a century, IPB has been at the forefront of global disarmament efforts, advocating for a world where diplomacy triumphs over war. Sean is a passionate peace builder and a background in conflict resolution and community development, and today, we will explore his journey and the urgent need for disarmament and the challenges holding powerful nations accountable. So welcome, Sean. Thank you so much for attending and gracing us for today's episode.
Thank you so much for having me.
How was your trip here in the Philippines so far?
It's been amazing, honestly. Incredible people, amazing food. Let me tell you, I've gained a few pounds since being here. And really, above all else, just listening and learning to local perspectives, those of peace activists and other social justice activists here, has really helped me to better understand the realities, and that's something I have a deep appreciation for.
And I call that elevator pitch, so let's go on. Okay, so probably let's start with your personal journey and motivations. So, can you share with us your experiences or upbringing that made you who you are now, a peace builder in the disarmament movement and the advocacy for peace?
Absolutely. I like to joke a little bit that my first experience as an activist for peace was when I was 9 years old. And don't take it too seriously, but when I was 9 in 5th grade is when we had in the US 9/11 occur. And I remember specifically in my classroom, every week we would be asked to write a short essay on topics of particular relevance to politics and history in the US. And the question one of the weeks, not too long after 9/11, was should the US retaliate in Afghanistan for the 9/11 attacks? And I can't fully explain, but at the time, I was raised in a sort of Christian household, not too deep into it, of course, but I was raised with really the fundamental beliefs that an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind, that when someone slaps us on the cheek, we turn the other cheek. And so my answer to the question at the time was no, we should not retaliate, that continuing a cycle of violence will only bring us deeper into violence. So somewhere in me deep were these convictions from a young age. As I grew older and saw the US's role in the world more clearly, whether it be in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, so on and so forth, but also learning a bit more of the history of US invasions, regime change, this really motivated me to want to fight back against injustice on the global stage. And a particular point of importance, I would say, is when I finished my bachelor's degree, I moved to Nicaragua, and began working with a small organization, Enlace Projects, in community development in a small community. But one of the first tasks they gave me upon arrival was learning the history of Nicaragua, a country where since its founding really had been almost constantly at war with itself or with external forces. Of course, the one that most people know about is the Sandinista Revolution of 1979, which overthrew a dictatorship that was US supported for most of the 20th century, followed by the Contra-Revolution, in which the US supplied arms and support to guerrilla forces with the main point of just causing chaos in the country to delegitimize the revolution. But even before that, there were several civil wars and difficulties in history there. So this experience and speaking with people on the ground who had lived through this time period in particular, you could see how generations of war and conflict had really affected the understandings of the people there. And I remember quite clearly speaking with the family that I was living with while I stayed there, who said, we don't agree with the government's policies now. In fact, we have a lot of opposition, but at the same time, war is not the solution to the situation. We've seen how that affects our communities, brothers, killing family members, and we cannot come back to that time. We have to create something new. And so for me, that I think was really the moment that I knew I wanted to bring that message to the world, that there have to be other solutions rather than war and violence to resolve our problems.
Whew, that was mouthful. Oh, that's nice. But probably bringing you back into the personal space of our conversation. But that was a good answer. So, what motivated you to pursue? Because you had the intercultural communication and conflict management, and how did you landed to IPB?
Mm-hmm. So, following my time in Nicaragua, I knew I wanted to continue my studies, and quite honestly, not in the United States for a number of reasons. I went to Germany to pursue a master's in intercultural conflict management. It was an amazing degree. We had a number of students from different countries, and part of the class was actually the living classroom in learning from one another in our different work styles. Upon completion of the program, I found myself in Berlin, a city that I have fallen in love with and didn't want to leave, and was looking for opportunities, and was lucky enough to land an internship with the International Peace Bureau in February 2020. Of course, this was the time right at the beginning of the pandemic. There were a lot of changes going on, and it was difficult because the organization really had to shift the way we were doing things. The leadership of the organization at the time was a bit of an older generation, so coming in, and we were able to develop new digital tools, new ways to promote advocacy online. And after my internship completion, my boss at the time had asked me to stay on and help them to organize a big conference. And so I continued to work, and over the years decided really to stick around because the work I found to be so dynamic, so valuable, and something that fulfilled really my interests and needs.
And IPB, how long have you been operating? I mean, since when it was founded, and how long was it since then?
So IPB was founded in 1891. At the time, it really was primarily a collection of European peace societies, middle-class organizations that had seen the wars of the 19th century and said, never again, we cannot do this. So they wanted to come together to learn from one another and to create a stronger international movement. Over time, it grew from being European or Euro-Atlantic to really now a global movement where we have over 400 organizations and 1,000 individuals from around 100 countries. So we've really seen ourselves come a long way. Of course, in the meantime, we had 2 world wars, we had several conflicts within the context of the Cold War, and so on and so forth. So we have a lot of work to do, and still we find we need to be more effective if we truly hope to not only eliminate war, but create justice in our societies and a long-term and sustainable peace.
And this is your first job? Your first company? Like first agency organization that you work with?
I've had a few jobs prior to this, for shorter amounts of time. So, I was an intern in Nicaragua, and then when I returned, I worked for an organization called the Center. What's the name here? Give me a second.
Something.
Yeah. But I worked for an organization for a Center for Cross-Cultural Studies. There we go. That's the name. Center for Cross-Cultural Studies, based in Massachusetts in the U.S. And the main purpose of that organization was international education, international exchange. We helped students, for example, to travel to countries to learn their culture, including one of our more unique programs there was that we had the opportunity to send U.S. students to Cuba to learn the reality on the ground in Cuba versus what we may hear from government or media sources.
So what were the pivotal moments in your life or probably career that really cemented your dedication for peace advocacy? Like you already mentioned how you grew up. But I think this question is more like when you were already an adult, was there an experience where you felt like, okay, I have to do this, like something that really made you like, okay, this is the path that I need to create for myself? Because when we grow old, and as our parents guide us through our adolescence, somehow they try to in a way create a certain path for us to walk through. They have a different dream for us.
Yeah, yeah.
And there are times that it's quite challenging to in a way break away from that path, because there's a moment in your life where like, okay, this is not the path for me, this is not the path where I should be pursuing. I should create my own. How was that?
Yeah, well, to be completely honest, I've always been a bit of a rebel, and whatever my parents may have wanted me to do was not necessarily of my interest. Especially in my teens, I dreamt of being a musician, a professional musician, and I still play music in my free time. It's still
The
a
Chinese
hobby of mine.
parents will be angry.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Mom, I want to be a musician. I was like, no.
That's for sure. Yeah, my parents were limited support for that. My dad always wanted me to go into the sciences in particular. Both my parents, though, were teachers, so I think I did have a distinct advantage of having that educational openness growing up. But when it came time to choose university and choose what I wanted to study, despite all of my practice for music, I was not a good enough musician to really pursue that forward, and I wasn't really sure that's what I wanted to study. So when it came to studying, I kind of chose at random and ended up in international relations during my bachelor's at the start. I loved it, but at the same time, this tendency I mentioned before for being sort of anti-war, anti-violence, really came out when I began taking some of the classes and realizing my professors didn't see things as didn't really focus on the peaceful elements, and I became a bit jaded with the international relations courses I was taking. I thought, I don't really see my place here, and then I found support in an advisor who told me I should switch to be an intercultural communication major. And this way I found it was a good opportunity to sort of learn more about other cultures and the importance of cultural exchange as part of peace. And as I was studying that, I always didn't really know where I'd see myself in the future. Until first I spent a semester in Barcelona studying, and this was my first time really outside of my US bubble. And so, it was my first time having to speak in another language actively, practicing my Spanish, to see there were other ways of life, other groups of people out there. And then, as I was mentioning with my experience of Nicaragua before, that was my first time outside of the Western bubble to really see a completely different perspective. And so I think this trajectory is sort of step by step pushed me more into the interest of peace throughout that. And then even my work with the Center for Cross-Cultural Study, I think that was my realization. I didn't want to work for a for-profit organization because I felt it was a bit soul-sucking when the primary concern, above all else, was the generation of profit for someone else. And that led me to nonprofit work, peace work, sort of all together. IPB fit the bill perfectly.
But is there a specific moment in your life wherein it really like cemented it? Like some people would probably stumble upon a stone or hit their head and suddenly they decide like, oh, this is the path that I really wanted to pursue. Like is there like certain like special moment that really decided like this is the path that I want to take?
I don't think it was any one moment. It's really an
evolution, like a journey.
Absolutely, yeah.
And all your experiences have led you to really...
Exactly.
Those experiences is the one that cemented you into this path.
That's it, yeah. For me, nothing's ever been sort of an immediate thing. I find really the path of life, it guides you to where you need to be, and that's, for me, certainly been the experience.
You see, no divine intervention. Just journey and experience. But probably let's proceed with the next one is leadership and vision. So since your appointment in 2022 as the Executive Director of the International Peace Bureau, uh, okay, what was there anything that IBP has been doing that you decided to change, and what are the other things, newer things that you decided where the IBP should pursue?
Uh, yeah, it's so I'll be completely honest here and say when I first began with IPB as executive director, I was a bit out of my league. I was underprepared for the responsibility that the position held. And it took me a while to really grasp and understand that I had the potential to make the changes that I always dreamed of making. But also, I don't want to take credit for everything because IPB is and always has been a really group effort because we are a network. All of our members are contributing, as well as, of course, our staff in the office. It's not about me, nor should it be solely about me, and that's something I really want to highlight. Is IPB is really the collective. But with that being said, there are things that we as a team have done under my role as executive director to move things forward. I would say first and foremost is we are moving away from a Eurocentric understanding of peace. Historically, IPB's slogan has been for a world without war, or disarmament for sustainable development, and these are important parts of what we're doing for sure. But we understand that we cannot limit our concept of peace to the absence of war, but that we need to involve more of social justice and in making sure that people have what they need to survive as a core of our understanding of peace. Beyond that, some specific programs, I would say the biggest one that we're pushing forward since I took over as the director is to emphasize peace education. We find that to be a missing piece, especially in today's world, no pun intended with missing piece, but that, you know, a lot of young people may not have a deeper understanding of what peace is and how it works. Our education systems a lot of times may teach, you know, the wars or the resistances that have occurred over time, but don't really bring any attention to how this is not how it needs to be in the future, that we can have other options, that we don't have to resort to war as the solution to problems. And this starts from a very individual level up through, of course, the international level. People need to be able to understand the emotions that they're feeling and have ways to express those emotions. So, you know, there is peace education on the individual or small group level that's coming to understand ourselves. There's the famous saying that's, you know, we cannot create peace in the world if we do not have peace within ourselves. So we find that to be an important aspect of peace education, but also looking more at the national or international levels and seeing, you know, what is it that we can provide to those who are interested to learn more about peace that can help them understand alternatives to war and the roles that everyone can play in that resistance.
I'm quite curious. What was there any like sort of like can you discuss the significance of global campaign on military spending? Because I also seen that on your social medias and also website as well. But a lot of our global powers, you know, they do a lot of spending on military. And I think more spending on military, the more military build up there, the more tension it gets. Like there's tension, regional tension that creates by putting more budget. But also, they always defend it as a, like, for security, for safety. We always have this excuse, which is weird for security and safety, but the military is always going out of the country and going to other countries and intervene on their operations and stuff. I was like, okay, is this really part of the security when all your military powers is all over the world? So it's quite weird. But what do you think about it? On IPB's perspective and also in your personal perspective as well, what's the significance of the global campaign? And was there any achievement so far or developments? Because you've been doing the global campaign for quite a while now.
Yeah. It is, one of our longest running campaigns at this point, and you emphasized a lot of important points, so I'll try to address a few of them first. To start, our most recent data, which comes from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, puts global military spending for 2023 at the figure of 2.4 trillion US dollars. Trillion.
Wow.
That's so many zeros after
That could
too.
feed the entire world out of hunger.
Oh yeah, and not just that, but do so much more. Fund the green transition away
Yes.
from fossil fuels to renewable energy, supporting communities that are suffering the extreme weather events that we're already seeing unfold. It could fund public education around the world and provide teachers with good salaries, students with the materials they need to learn and to succeed in life. So there are so many other uses of this, and that is the center of the campaign, is really that we need this 2.4 trillion US dollars for what really makes us safe. And this begs the question of what does security mean and who gets to define security? And if we leave it up to our elected officials, to our leaders around the world, typically they're concerned mostly about the state level security, the borders, the forces that protect the state, and maybe economic interests of those who already have quite a bit of money in their pockets. But not necessarily the security interests of those who are suffering in our societies. And one question we are asking, everyone we come to is, what do you feel makes you safe? What is it that would make you feel like you have security in your own life? And when you ask that question to ordinary people, typically the answer is not, more and more military spending, more bombs, more tanks, but they say, well, job security, good health insurance, good, salaries, and the ability to live my life with freedom and to be able to express myself, things of this sort, freedom from fear and want, which is the definition of human security. And so that becomes the center point of where we put our work is let's invest in human security, not militarized security.
There's a lot of studies about that, but why do you think the reason why more countries ignoring those factors, instead putting more money on military?
Self-interest would be a big part of it. The military-industrial complex, if we look at political leaders in some countries, I don't want to generalize too much, but a lot of them seem to have stock invested or have some relation to military producers. And so there is a certain self-interest of politicians. It's also an easy solution. When you can claim to be protecting a country just by putting more and more money into military spending, it becomes an easy solution to what is otherwise a very complicated problem. You say, we're facing risks from XYZ countries, this requires more military spending, and all of a sudden, people will say, phew, okay, we're safe from them now. But of course we know this isn't true, and we also see it's fueling an arms race, especially right now, when one country spends more money, what do their adversaries do? Spend more money on the military, and it goes back and forth. We are currently in this spiral of more and more spending, more and more arms, and what's particularly concerning in this regard is it's not just on the typical things we think about, but also new military technologies. If we look at artificial intelligence, or if we look at drones and their use in current warfare and in future warfare, this is extremely concerning for us because they're unregulated areas of warfare, and we may have a time in the near future where a machine is deciding who's a militant and who's not, who's to kill and who's not, and there may be no human control over that.
And in times of war and conflict, it's always the people on the ground, the vulnerable communities who are affected, and not those in power, and not those in the privileged position. But let's go directly to where I'm really curious to ask, why the Philippines?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, the World Peace Congress will be hosted by the Philippines in what year?
2026, next year.
2026, next year. Why? What influenced whoever organized this to choose the Philippines?
Absolutely. So, since 2016, we have organized a World Peace Congress every 5 years. So we've done 2 rounds so far. 2016 was in Berlin, 2021 was in Barcelona. As you can see by those 2 locations, both in Europe, and this was before I had taken over as director. But we also understood that we had to get out of Europe, and we had to really, if it's a World Peace Congress, then it needs to be a world event and not just something that's hosted time and time again in Europe.
This is the first in Asia.
This will be the first in Asia, yes.
Oh, now I take it back. Okay, I take pride of that. Okay, the first Asian World Peace Congress will be in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
But still, what
Yeah.
factors made you choose the Philippines? I mean, there's Thailand, more peaceful, more progressive. We have Singapore.
There could be a lot of good options, but I think our main reasons are several folds. Maybe first to say that currently our co-president of the board, our governing body of IPB, is Filipina. Many people might know her. Her name is Corazon Fabros. She's a longtime activist here, and such a positive influence on us as an organization. So having that's a leadership presence in the Philippines and someone who is well connected provides us with an introductory sense, because also the World Peace Congress should not be dictated from us in Berlin, but it should be in partnership with local activists, local organizations, local peace-loving people. And so having that connection and being able to really meet and discuss with local activists is something that makes the World Peace Congress a success. Without that, we would not be able to do it. But beyond that, we also see the Philippines is in the center of a region that is on the brink of future conflict, that is facing high military tensions. And this is something...
China.
Yeah. So we find this to be very concerning, whether it be the U.S. military presence in the Philippines and U.S. posturing towards China, which especially under now President Donald Trump is seen to be increasing. We expect greater confrontation against China under President Trump. And then, of course, we also see aggression and a growing military, let's say, maybe posturing or confidence of the Chinese military in the West Philippines, South China Sea, and growing nuclear arsenal of China as well. We see really the groundwork for a new Cold War between the US and China to be forming. And it's something, sorry, just one other point there is to say, historically, if we look back to a concept that's called the Thucydides trap, which I think is very important to note in this time. It's Thucydides was an author in ancient Greece who documented Athens and Sparta, where you had Athens as a falling regional power, a hegemonic power, and Sparta as a rising power. And what Thucydides had hypothesized at the time, and what we've seen play out many times since then, is when one superpower's influence is waning, economic soft power influence is waning, and another's is rising, then it's very likely that conflict will erupt between those two powers. So with that in mind, we find it key at this point that we raise our voices to prevent a future hot war between the countries and to find ways to reduce those tensions and find peace together.
I just wanted to add, in the past few years and even in the previous administration of Donald Trump, he seemed a little bit chummy, if that's the right word. Not antagonizing or not what you call it, he seems okay with China and Russia, for example. So do you think there's a possibility that under the Trump administration there will be a little bit of a pause between the tension with the US between Russia and China?
I am hesitant about that, I would say. First and foremost, one thing about Donald Trump is he loves to have his ego stroked. He loves leaders who will, give him some compliments, and economic interests are above all else. So there is some potential there for possible détente between the powers, we can say, a reduction of tensions. However, at the same time, the U.S. as a whole, whether it be under Democrats, Republicans, has been increasingly hostile towards China, mostly because they see the threats to the US economy. And this is again what we see with a waning economic power and a growing economic power. There's also the conventional understanding that's in the US military that is preparing for a Chinese invasion of Taiwan in, the US says, in I think 2027, the year for it. And so the US is continuing to send more arms and military support to Taiwan. There's increasing tensions in the Taiwan Straits and of course in the West Philippines, South China Sea. And really the issue could be whether it's purposeful, accidental, a false flag operation, that one side or the other, there's a mistake and someone gets injured, a ship gets sunk, and then some actions need to be taken. And it's very easy that it could turn into a hostile situation because it's also not just Trump, but the US public that has been sort of prepared for antagonism with China. And from China's end, also, they see the US as an imperial power. To be honest, they're both imperial powers to some degree, differing degrees, of course.
He didn't came from me.
But so there's a lot of risk at this moment that could escalate into a conflict. So I don't see Donald Trump as preventing that necessarily. I can see how he has respect for maybe the leadership style and the one-man rule of China or Russia, but that's not enough in my mind to prevent war or to, having some interests in line with each other isn't enough to outdo the other interests that are at play.
Okay, I would like to follow up a question for that, but I'll drag you back again to this interesting question. Can you give us a go through or an explanation on what's going to happen with the International or World Peace Congress?
Mm-hmm.
How does it look? Who's attending? Where will it be exactly here in the Philippines? What are the potential topics that probably has to be discussed?
Mm-hmm. So the final date has not yet been set, but we are looking at the later half of, or even the final quarter of 2026. So we still have almost 2 full years of preparation to do. And with that being said, we're in the introductory steps. So the next steps will still follow, and that includes forming program committees, groups both locally and internationally to discuss exactly what the program will look like, what will be included. But I can give you some insights from the experience we had in 2021 in Barcelona. That program was a 3-day-long program with plenary sessions and workshops as well as cultural events. We find it very important to include those cultural music, dance, theater as part of our peace work because it is so essential. But we had high-level speakers from UN officials to parliamentarians of various countries to civil society leaders across the globe, really from every continent that were included. And the workshop topics would vary from topics such as economic justice and peace, indigenous peoples and peace building through indigenous practices, to tactics for nuclear and conventional disarmament, topics on regional concerns such as how we foster peace and democracy in Africa, led by African peace builders, and same in Asia Pacific and Latin America. So it's a very diverse program, and really the idea that we had for 2021 was to expand that idea of peace as not just the absence of war, but really so much more. So we certainly will continue that, but certain topics that we have in mind now, without going too deep into it, is of course focusing on the West Philippines and South China Sea will be something that will need to be in focus, and reducing tensions between the East and West. Also, the presence of military bases is something we find to be very important to talk about at this point, and the consequences of military bases, connections to climate change as well. There was a report that came out a couple of years ago and that has guided a lot of our work that estimates militaries around the world being responsible for 5.5% of all global greenhouse gases, which if it were a country would be the 4th largest polluter.
I think I heard that. I think Greta Thunberg posted about that, about how wars and conflict really lead to like climate issues.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I'm curious, who's attending this event? Who are the expected guests? And probably, what is the tangible, like what are we expecting, like a tangible result after this event? Because I'm coming with these questions from, because I have attended a lot of Peace Forum. We have the Paris Peace Forum and all the other conferences on peace, and a lot of speakers, powerful ones, and somehow there's really no metric of success every after part of the forum. I mean, it seems like everyone are just talking, everyone are listening, and people are there to network, but not really make change. That's just my observation. I'm not invalidating.
It's a fair observation.
A lot of efforts.
Very fair observation.
But
yeah. No, and it is a legitimate criticism of conferences, including the ones that we've had. That being said, we shouldn't discount the importance of networking either. That the most important conversations to happen at a lot of these conferences are not the ones that are happening in the rooms, the official halls, workshops, but really the ones happening on the sidelines. Groups that have never met before, or maybe are aware of each other, finding ways to work together or generating new and creative ideas. So a lot of that kind of goes under the table. But beyond that, we do have some more concrete objectives, and in terms of who we hope to be there, just to say the event will be open to the public. It's not by invite only. We do hope a lot of students and young people will be there in attendance. That was, I think, one of the biggest successes that we had for the 2021 conference, is that we had a huge number of students, young people who were interested, who were volunteering and actively taking part in the event. Beyond that, in terms of more concrete objectives that we could hope for from it, I would say likely, like we did in 2021, we will create an action plan as a follow-up, something that we're working on together as what are the next steps that we can take. And beyond that, we hope that both those informal spaces and those formal spaces will help to create a greater understanding of unity for global peace, including specifically in the Asia-Pacific region, having different partners from the Asia-Pacific countries coming together. We are IPB at our heart, a network, and what networking really is good for is sharing tools, resources, experiences, learning from one another, and then finding, even if we have points of disagreement, that we can also find that we're working towards the same ultimate goal. We have more in common than we have what separates us, and therefore we can lift up our voice together for global peace.
So how do you perceive the Philippine government intention and ambition to be part, or to be voted to be seated into the UN Security Council?
Well, in general, one thing that we have been pushing for a while is Security Council reform. What we see now is a Security Council that is completely paralyzed and unable to address the concerns of our time. And this was one of the primary results to come out of the UN Summit of the Future in September last year. There is a Pact of the Future that was passed by all member states of the United Nations that calls for changes. Unfortunately, it's an incredibly weak document, with the calls being more almost suggestions. But among these calls is a commitment to looking at reforms to the Security Council. And we do find it important that we don't just have these 5 colonial big powers being the ones to make decisions around peace and security. We need to expand it and have voices of medium and small countries represented. Whether the Philippines or not would be one of these is another question, but in general, it will be important that we have those reforms to include more voices and more perspectives on the Security Council, including from regions that are underrepresented, and particularly in Africa. But when we talk about the Philippines in particular, I have mixed feelings. On one hand, the Philippines is a country that has signed on to most all of the international agreements on disarmament, for example, landmines or the abolition of nuclear weapons. And this is something that is viewed quite positively internationally anyways, because these treaties are important at least to limit the tools of warfare to ones that are more humane. Of course, that's not enough, and we do see growing military expenditure and growing confrontational attitude of the military in the Philippines. If we see the side of the Philippines that is more for multilateralism and more for finding peaceful resolution to conflicts, I could see that being quite a positive thing, but we would need, of course, to see a Philippines that is not so ready to enter into warfare in such a proposal. In any case, these decisions for Security Council reform and new members would have to be made through democratic processes, including all of the member states, to make the votes. So through that, regional representation, great, but let's hope that that those who do get the seat on the council are taking it seriously as a responsibility to use peace and disarmament as our tools and not just for their own self-interest.
Can you help us understand what disarmament advocacy is all about? Because a lot of people, especially the generation nowadays, the younger generation, are having a hard time to digest on what it's really about. What's the difference between the disarmament advocacy and the peace advocacy? It seems like a little bit of a cloudy wording, but are they the same?
They're part of the same. They're different aspects of our peace work, and when we talk about peace advocacy in general, that can take a number of forms, whether it be on the ground peace building work, whether it be protests and pushing the governments for diplomatic efforts or for increasing that. But disarmament in particular is one of our central concerns, because as long as we keep increasing the weaponry that we have and creating new forms of weaponry, we're putting the world at a greater risk. If you have the tools in front of you, you're more likely to use them than if they're not there. So that's a big part of it. Disarmament advocacy can take a few ways. There are groups that work on very targeted disarmament. For example, nuclear disarmament. If we look at the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, they're focused pretty solely on the nuclear disarmament, which is of course important because nuclear weapons are an existential threat if they're to be used. But there's also, disarmament around certain types of weapons, whether it be intermediate range missiles, whether it be landmines, which we know landmines, typically the greatest victims are innocent civilians and not those actually fighting in a war. And then we have general disarmament, and that's where IPB puts most of our effort. While we do, of course, support these targeted ones, at the end of the day, if you still have the conventional weapons, your capabilities to fight wars continue, and these weapons, whether they be small arms and light weapons that are proliferated both through legal and extra legal or illegal, if we're being honest, means, often trafficked, but also these large weapons, warplanes, fighter jets, warships, tanks, so on and so forth, and this is where a lot of the money that's being spent on the military is going, of course, is to the equipment. So we want to decrease that, and really the strategy that we take is that where possible it should be through mutual reductions, that one country isn't just unilaterally saying I'm going to stop creating new weapons or stop buying new weapons, but that it should be done in collaboration between countries, because this can also be a tool for building trust between countries. As we mentioned before, if one country is increasing its military spending, increasing the armaments that it has, other countries are going to see that as a threat, and they'll be doing the same. So what is the opposite is that we find these ways for mutual reductions for states to reduce the number of arms they have. And where this has been done in the past, we see that it leads to greater understanding between countries, greater trust being built, and therefore we can prevent the wars through disarmament, through this mutual efforts to build trust between countries. And so that's why disarmament is so important for our advocacy.
Was there any progress, or have we achieved something like that in the past? Like what were the achievements so far of the disarmament advocacy for the past years?
Well, in the past years, there have really been no big achievements. We've seen quite the opposite, as we really are entering an arms race now, and sadly, our voices are not being listened to when we discuss disarmament. I would say probably the biggest success in general, and it's not IPB's success, but it's a success for the world, is the abolition of the military in Costa Rica. This was something that's really is a unique case that we haven't seen anywhere else, but Costa Rica, I believe it was back in the 1980s, if I'm not mistaken, recognized the continued violence through Central America that was being proliferated by the military presence there. They decided to abolish their own military and serve as a place of peace to bring those Central American countries together for discussions and reinvest what they were investing in the military into the social well-being in the country. So I would say that would be one very big success that we've seen. Also, of course, at the end of the Cold War, there was a lot of hope that there would be great disarmament, and for a while it proved true. If we look at the end of the Cold War, the military spending and armaments did decrease for an amount of time. Sadly, disarmament on its own is not sustainable. We need to continue diplomatic efforts. We need to find conflict resolution tools and fund conflict resolution tools. And so what we had hoped would be a peace dividend, that's reductions in arms would lead to greater societal well-being and support for diplomacy, never fully materialized. And instead what we saw was, especially in the post 9/11 world, an even greater focus on military solutions and less focus on diplomatic solutions.
Okay, the most interesting question, at least for me, we live in a world like now where a lot of countries, world power, G7 members, or doing a lot of things around the world that is, how am I going to say it? Impunity is happening around the world when it comes to talk about peace and war. How do we make these world powers accountable?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm going also to add on that, because we have this climate agenda, we have this peace agenda, we have this a lot of sustainable campaigns and developments where we guilt trip the poor countries to follow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But them who was championing this, peace, whatever, they don't really follow. In return, they actually contributed to it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how do we make them accountable?
Well, if we had an easy answer for that, then I think the world would be a very different place than it is right now, right? But what I can say is solidarity remains the greatest tool that we have, international solidarity and international organizing. From the community level through the international level, this I think is very important, that we learn from one another, we listen to one another, we support one another, and that we come together to push for that change. The other thing I can say is, particularly when it comes to the richer and more powerful countries acting with impunity, we are seeing big changes in power dynamics on the global stage, and we are seeing a unique opportunity for smaller countries and for lower income countries to have more of a say in the international sphere. So we have to support this when it is, of course, in line with peace and justice, which it not always is. But this, and of course the voice from civil society to raise it up louder, to support one another, that will be the greatest tool that we have, and one that we cannot avoid using.
Can you explain to us, or can you tell us the intersectional impact of wars?
Absolutely.
Who are really affected by this? Because a lot of people think like, this war from far places, it's fine, we're not gonna be affected by it. But on top of those communities that are really in the middle of wars, there's actually an impact as well outside of those areas. So would you be able to share it?
Of course, yeah. So, of course, in the conflict itself, marginalized people are always more affected, whether it be, women, indigenous communities, poor people, feel the impacts of war the greatest. That's not to say that, of course, the men, and particularly those who many times are forced to fight in the wars, are not impacted as well. Everyone will be impacted, but we have to look, when we look at intersectionality, that there are overlapping factors that affect particularly marginalized people the most. When we look outside of the conflict zone directly, I would say probably the greatest victim is climate and the environment. but also in maybe a more theoretical sense, the truth. It is very hard to know what's actually happening in a conflict zone when you're outside of it, and this can lead to a lot of misinformation, disinformation, people believing lies about what one side or another may be doing, or hiding the truth of what one side or another may be doing. So that, of course, is maybe a theoretical victim. And of course, the impacts can ripple. If we look, for example, at the war in Ukraine, Ukraine was one of the largest grain exporters prior to Russia's invasion. And those grains primarily would go to Africa. And many countries depended on those imports to feed their population. So we saw a huge food shortage crisis that resulted from Russia's invasion in Ukraine. We also see larger economic consequences, whether it be affecting trade routes, as we've seen since October 7th, and Israel's campaign, if I can say so, genocidal campaign in Gaza, and the Red Sea trade routes that were badly affected for a while that led to late deliveries. Of course, these are minute problems compared to what the people of Palestine have faced, and particularly Gazans, since the 7th of October. But if we're looking at the larger impacts, of course, this can also create havoc, which can be taken advantage of by certain types of leaders to come to power, and the effects of wars ripple for a long time after the war. In many different ways, and in the end, with any war, most people will be affected in one way or another, whether they realize it or not.
Well, you mentioned already Israel, so let's proceed to that. Okay, what are your thoughts about this? A few days ago, President Donald Trump just uttered the most craziest statement ever about displacing the Palestinian people and moving into another country and developing and owning the Gaza Strip. I just want to touch it. Okay, we live in a world now where global leaders say genocidal things, but we always find an excuse to defend them. It's just weird. Then, on top of saying genocidal things, they actually also commit, and there's a physical manifestation of that. I'm not so sure I wanted to touch this anymore, because it's like
a very sensitive topic.
It's like a dark shadow that it cannot be explained on one thing. But it's good that you highlighted that. Probably, let's just move on. What is transitional justice?
Well, for me, transitional justice is a very out-of-date term. One of the few papers that I have published academically actually calls for a need for a broader understanding of justice post-conflict, and what is typically referred to as transformational justice. So transitional justice, if we look at the basic concepts, it is how you deal post-conflict with the consequences of that conflict, of what happened during that time, whether it be a war or whether it be authoritarian repression, as we saw in a lot of South America back in the 1970s and 1980s. But what we find is if you just focus on what happened and, tools such as truth and reconciliation committees, releasing reports, and maybe prosecuting those who were responsible, that may address the immediate problem. But unless there are significant structural reforms, including possibly whether it be political reforms to how the political structure itself works, whether it be necessary economic reforms to really take care of the victims of those past things, then it needs to be a more well-rounded concept. And so this is what we refer to as transformational justice. That post-conflict, there need to be structural changes that are made to prevent the repeat of something happening again. And so for us, that's the term we're currently using. Of course, we understand transitional justice is important, but maybe not enough, that we need to do a bit more than transitional justice to include transformation, to create a new reality that will prevent similar conflicts from coming back.
Do you have an idea of a new word instead of using transitional justice?
Transformational justice, yes.
Oh. Okay. And do you think that now we have a ceasefire in Gaza, that there will be a transformational justice there?
With the remarks that are coming out from leaders, there are no positive signs of that. However, we do have international solidarity and support, whether it be South Africa's case and some of the UN and ICJ reports that have come out that do hold promising results and are encouraging a process of transformational justice. But we need to continue to pressure the powers that be that are preventing transformation from happening and for justice to really be in place.
So we're a little bit tight of time, so I want to ask a few, like 2 more questions. What do you think are the components or necessary elements to really achieve a sustainable and lasting peace and reconciliation in the world?
I think the most important would be the active participation and inclusion of civil society, of people within the society, especially the immediately affected people by the conflict. If they are not part of the conversation, if conversations on peace and justice only include leaders, they will not be successful. And this, of course, also includes particularly the marginalized communities. There are studies showing that the participation of women, for example, in negotiations for peace increase the likelihood of success and sustainability of that peace several fold, so it's much more successful. And so for us, this is the most important element, that civil society, people need to be involved in peace. And there need to be, as mentioned before, structural reforms that follow through on this that really prevent such a conflict from breaking out again. And this is again why we find it so important to bring people together at the World Peace Congress that we're planning for next year, to raise that voice of civil society, to bring those voices together and demand that governments around the world are listening to civil society.
So what legacy would you leave the world should in the future you have to stop what you're doing? I mean, what do you think, like, you and IBP wants to, the legacy that you want to leave?
So personally, I don't want a legacy of my own. I don't want people to remember my name or what I do. I would prefer it to be behind the scenes. But what I hope is my legacy is lifting up the voices of those who have experience in conflict zones, who are calling for peace around the world, who have much better insights than my own. If I can help to lift up the voices of others, if IPB can lift up these people's voices, and through that advocate for change, bring people in to create a greater global voice for peace, that is the legacy, again, not necessarily for me, but for IPB, that I would like to leave behind.
You're being too humble. I just told you to leave that to the politicians.
If I'm not humble, then there's problems, especially, we talked about politicians, we talked about people in positions of power, and I think I'm very skeptical of how power influences people. I believe that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. If I don't make active efforts to keep myself humble, then I'm worried about how the power may influence my own decisions. And I'm also very aware that I am a white man from middle-class America at the head of a peace organization when I did not grow up in a conflict zone, when I have not experienced war directly myself or the consequences thereof. Therefore, I'm not the person who needs to be heard all the time. And that is perfectly clear. That's not humble for me. That is fact. That, I'm here to be a voice for IPB, but I don't want to be the face of IPB. There are many people who deserve that way more than I do. And so my role, I truly see it as lifting up the voices of others.
But I totally connect to that, because what defines us as a human being is actually what we do with our privileges.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you, as a white American from the US, who've gone in full length in doing a lot of things around the world, you have contributed and led this organization to to hopefully address the issues on peace and hopefully create a sustainable and lasting not just peace but reconciliations of a lot of things. There's a lot
Absolutely,
of heavy
yeah.
things that is happening. But next question, I mean probably the last or no the second. um, what would you what advice would you give to all those peace builder, peace workers, humanitarian development workers who are doing advocacies on peace, reconciliations, on even disarmament, given the political climate of war here in the world?
I would say it's more important than ever to have solidarity with one another, to connect with one another when we have difficulties, to share those with others, and when we have successes, to celebrate them with others. The beauty of IPB's network really is in this exchange that we have between all of the members. If you're not a member of IPB, we'd love to have you as part of our network. And strengthening this all together, because we are standing, again, even when we may have small disagreements on particular elements of what exactly we need to achieve with disarmament or this or that, that we're in this struggle together, and we need to have that solidarity with one another.
Last question, or maybe I wanted to add on that. I just feel like the solidarity thing is a little bit surface. Maybe a message to all the advocates and activists who are struggling on keeping up the fight. Yes, there's solidarity, but their struggle is more than just having someone to just say, "Hey, you're doing great." What do you want to say to them?
Yeah, well, I can say from the personal level that I struggle sometimes too, and there are times I question, am I making the right moves at IPB? Are we going in the right direction? How can we keep this up in this environment that we find ourselves in? I think it's very natural to have that, and it's also very natural to sometimes retreat and take times for ourselves, to care for ourselves. If we aren't caring for ourselves, we can't hope to do the work that we need to do. And understanding when we need to take a step back, that there are others within our community who we can rely on to continue that fight until we're able ourselves to come back.
What would you say to your younger self? That younger self when you were still exploring what you really want to do in life?
Yeah, trust the the path, I suppose. Don't give up. Because I did struggle with a lot of mental health issues when I was younger. There were times when I thought I wouldn't amount to anything, when I wouldn't, really be able to achieve anything with my life. I didn't have that hope. And just saying, keep going, I think is really the most important thing. Rely on your friends, rely on your loved ones, and keep going.
Do you, in a way, have regrets by breaking that path that your family designed for you? I mean, they were hoping that you will be someone else, and you're here in the Philippines with us, fighting the fight that needs to be fight.
I don't have any regrets, and to be honest, I am very privileged as well that my parents are my biggest supporters. Despite the choices that I made that maybe were not their original ideas, they never once made me feel guilty about making the choices that I made. And to this day, they're some of IPB's biggest supporters as well. So I am really privileged in that regard.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sean William Connor, for gracing us. It has been a pleasure to have you for the Pathbreakers, and I've learned so much, and this has been really engaging because a lot of people also need to understand what we're doing. The challenges here is that there's a lot of international organizations. So we talk in this bubble, a lot of highfalutin words, a lot of deep campaigns that eventually we always ask, who are really our target audience? Who are we communicating with? And yes, I think on your level you have to communicate with people in power. But at the same time, I think people on the ground also deserve to because also at the end of the day, IBP now what you call it, sort of like influence the governments or people in power, but it's always the people on the ground who could also make an impact to give that pressure to the
100%,
national
yeah.
government as well.
Mhm.
Again, thank you so much, Sean,
you for having
and
me.
I wish well for the IBP, and I'm hoping to attend the World Peace Congress next year.
You better be there.
Can
Yeah.
you sort of like invite people?
Please, yeah, please join us for the World Peace Congress 2026 here in the Philippines. We are open to everyone and anyone who's already a peace activist, who's peace curious, or whatever you may be. You're more than welcome to join us for these conversations and to be a part of this global movement that we have for a more peaceful and just world.
Okay, thank you for tuning in, and I'm so happy and I learned a lot from Sean. And this is your host for today, and thank you for watching Pathbreaker. And I would also like to plug our partners as well. So for this show, the Asia Pacific Film Institute, Adowa Magazine, and the Asbury for making all this happen. Yay! Bye guys, and see you on the next episode. Like and subscribe.